how do you get stronger and better and prepare your body for pole when you don't have a pole? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Pole conditioning, no pole, what to do, some recommendations from me as an online pole dance teacher and also a personal trainer and also a certified pole strength and conditioning specialist. But before we hop into it, as always, I want to say a big shout out, thank you, love y'all, to my members. Podcast genuinely could not happen without y'all. And that, of course, is my Science of Slinks folks, Ride or Die, get all my classes, all my workshops, all my self-paced online courses. Y'all are fantastic. And of course, my Essentials of Slink folks who join me for 1 hour a week, working within their capacity and making time for their movement. I appreciate all y'all. And if you want to join us, I got links down below. I don't do closed doors anymore. You're an adult. You know when you have capacity and free time and want to join for a month or not. So with that, let's get into it real quick. Conditioning. I'm going to talk about some common mistakes and misconceptions, and then I'm going to talk about some things that you can do to help condition off the pole. First off, I think a big thing that people get confused by is the difference between conditioning and cross-training. So when we are conditioning for movements, we are training our body specifically to get better at sport-specific, dance-specific movements that are going to help us in the activity of our choice. This is different from cross-training. Cross-training is when we are doing movements outside of our specific sport to help build us as more rounded movers and individuals. So I think a really good example here of what would be, in my judgment, cross-training rather than conditioning for pole would be something like steady state cardio for a long time. So is cardiovascular endurance helpful for pole? Yeah, absolutely. But we tend to be more in the high moderate intensity range for a couple minutes. Unless you're doing like go-go dancing or you've got really long stage sets or something, you're probably only going to need like 5 to 10 minutes of intense pole activity. And if you're working on steady state cardio for, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour doing long distance running, not necessarily saying it's going to be bad for your body, but it's not going to specifically help you with pole as much as a more targeted conditioning exercise would. So that's the difference between cross-training and conditioning. Also, in general, I recommend doing cross-training sort of during your off season, whenever that is. So when you don't have a performance coming up, and then when you begin to prepare for that performance, adding in specific conditioning to support your goals, and then petering down the intensity of the conditioning as you get real close to performance time, and then you take a break. And then you do your cross-training, and then you get back into conditioning. So periodizing. Another super common mistake I see, especially with folks who are newer to pole or are newer to exercise, is going way too hard. So when we are conditioning, we are trying to slowly increase our envelope of capacity. If we try to dramatically increase our envelope of capacity really quickly, that's when you start to see injuries. And even if your muscles are adapting, even if you're noticing that you're getting stronger, your tendons and ligaments take a much longer time. So we're looking at the order of 3 to 6 months to see adaptation in those structures, just because they have so much less blood flow to them. So really take your time, push yourself less hard than you think you need to, especially if, you're a real gunner, go-getter, A student type of person. I see y'all, because I see myself. Some good guidelines here. If you are super sore the day after you do a conditioning workout, you went too hard. Ideally, you don't get super sore. You might notice a little bit of stiffness, but it should get better by the end of a warm-up, and it shouldn't stick around, especially if you're getting sore for multiple days. That tells me the intensity of what you're doing or the duration that you're working at is just too high for you. Step it on back down, right? We're nudging. We're nudging the envelope. We're not chucking it. Another good indicator of going too hard is the first rep of something that you do, the first repetition of a movement should be easy, right? So if you are working on your climbs and you're working on bodyweight squats and that's not a position that you've worked on and you do one bodyweight squat and it feels really, really hard, you're probably going to want to regress that in some way. You're probably going to want to reduce the load so you can work on building the mechanics and understanding the mechanics and be working in a strength building range. Now there's absolutely a place for training, more at the extreme end, to focus on your 1 rep maximum. If that's the sort of training that you're really interested in, I would work with someone who really specializes in that and specializes in working with folks who are really, really working to push themselves. Another thing is really only doing one thing for conditioning and really focusing in on that. So I see this pretty often with something like pole crunches, right? So pole crunches are very helpful if what you are working on is specifically the part of a movement where you lift your legs. If you have trouble holding your body weight, right? If you can't do a bent arm stronghold for, let's say, 10 to 15 seconds and just hang out there and feel comfortable, pole crunches are not going to be something that I would recommend for you to do in the air because you are working on that component, and really separating it out and focusing on the thing that's holding you back is what's going to get you the greatest impact. If that's where you are and you're like, oh, but I still do want to work on the leg lifting component, still doing pole crunches, absolutely fine, just working with your butt on the ground. So you're not holding your weight up with your arms and you can really focus on just the legs coming in. I think conditioning is a really good place for us to pick apart movement patterns so that we can focus on things individually. And also, you got to plan your conditioning based on what it is you're conditioning for, right? We get better at what we train specifically. There's no, we don't have our fitness bucket that we just put scoops into and suddenly get better at pole. If you want to get better at something specific in pole, you have to train for that specific thing. So what are some options for training? So big one would be resistance training. This is definitely the best way to build strength. And resistance training here, I mean doing something more than your body weight. We'll talk about body weight in just a second. And ideally, when we're doing things on the pole, when we're learning new tricks, we are working within our envelope of capacity. So if I am, let's say, working on doing a handstand and holding my hands up overhead, ideally, I can actually do that for a little bit more than my body weight, so that'll give me some ability and capacity to move and adjust and do extra things, and also have a little bit more endurance and hang out there. If my body weight is exactly as much as I can lift and not an ounce more, that's going to be a problem if something starts to go wrong and I need a little bit of wiggle room to adjust, right? So if I was, working on really conditioning that, maybe I'd start wearing ankle weights. And then when it comes time to performance time and I take the ankle weights off, everything gets easier. Yeah, that old trope. Some ways that you can do resistance training: you can do weightlifting. So you can use free weights or dumbbells, which are the little ones you hold in one hand. You can do barbells, which are the big ones you hold in both hands. Both good options. In general, if you're training at home by yourself, I would probably push you towards dumbbells rather than barbells, just because there's some positions where if you don't have someone to help you out, if you got kind of in a stuck place, you might not have such a good time. So that's just my recommendation. And you can also use bands. You can also use a cable machine if you happen to have a cable machine. Those are also fantastic, or if you have a gym that has a cable machine. But bands can replicate some of that sort of wiggliness, kind of instability. What they can't replicate is having the same amount of force throughout the entire range. Bands will obviously have more force at the end of the range than in the middle of the range, but they're really nice because they add a good stability component into the work, and also much easier to store and transport, especially if you're working at home, than a huge weight rack or a bunch of barbells or something. You can also work on body weight exercises. So some things that I pull in from my training that I do for folks with my online conditioning classes, because those are always equipment optional. I work on isometrics. So isometrics are when you are not moving, you are contracting the muscle, but you are resisting the movement. So you don't actually go anywhere. The really nice thing about isometrics as a equipment-free option is that they actually increase in difficulty with your strength. So they scale with you and can be challenging at every level of capacity, which I think is really, really wonderful, especially for those of us who are working out at home. We don't necessarily have the budget / time to be going out and getting new, dumbbells whenever we get stronger. I also draw quite a bit from other, calisthenic movement traditions and more bodyweight training. Gymnastics also has a lot of drills that are relevant for some of the things that we do in pole. So that might be a place that you look for more bodyweight training that is still going to be relevant for us and what we're doing in pole. But conditioning is about more than strength. Of course, strength is really important. We do want to be strong enough to do what we want to do, but remember that when we are training, we get better at the specific thing that we are training, and pole makes a lot of demands in our body. So I would also recommend, as part of your conditioning, to do flexibility conditioning, right? Working on your mobility, working on your range of motion. If you're interested in working into an extreme range of motion, working with a contortion coach, someone who is going to be able to help you, especially things like deep back bends, over splits, all that sort of stuff that you may want to begin eventually working on, you're going to want to condition off the pole. You don't want the first time you see if you have got the range of motion to do a spatchcock to be on the pole as you're trying to do a spatchcock, right? You got to make sure that you can do it already on the ground before you start trying to add to that vertical component. I also mentioned this a little bit earlier, but another thing that you can condition for off the pole is balance training, especially if you're interested in doing more low flow, more sort of handstandy stuff, inversions on the ground. Adding in handstands can be a really nice way to give yourself a little bit more movement vocabulary, really work on your balance, really work on your strength. Also, endurance. So like I said, steady state cardio for like a couple hours is not the most relevant for most of us on pole. I would instead recommend doing high or moderate intensity cardio in sort of smaller chunks. And also because what we do is pretty upper body intensive, I think rowing and rowing machines can be a really nice option for conditioning for pole because we do a lot of pulling. It gets the lower body in there a little bit as well, but it's also very upper body. Or if they got them bikes with the handles that you can move back and forth, that can also be a nice way to add an upper body component as well to your cardio conditioning. Or, I mean, listen, I don't like burpees, but if you like burpees, you can do burpees, right? Definitely a high intensity movement. High intensity interval training can be a really effective way to increase your cardiovascular endurance. Generally, especially for folks working at home, I tend to lean more towards moderate intensity rather than high intensity. Part of it is that I am less likely personally to do something if I know it's going to be super high intensity. And I'm much more likely to actually show up if I'm like, this will be moderate. I can handle this. And I know some people love the super high intensity cardio. And if it's you, absolutely go for it. But really working in like the 5 to 10 minute range, if you can like go pretty hard for a solid 10 minutes, I mean, cardio wise, it's kind of what we need for pole. You're probably set. Also, and this is a fun one, you can work on your visualization as part of your conditioning for pole. And I think that this can be really helpful, especially if you are someone who's working on building your mechanics, your understanding, your proprioception, your interoception. So really sitting down and imagining yourself working through a movement and all of the pieces that are part of that and how they would all work together. And I know that this sounds like hokey nonsense, but the evidence really does back it up. And especially for moves with a power component, for moves where you have to do things quickly. So if you're a power pole enjoyer, a good citation for this, by the way, is Hynes and Turner 2020. That'll be in the down there. So especially if you're a power pole enjoyer, especially if you're working on spins, especially if you're working on anything explosive, circus climb, a great example of a pole trick that really does work better if you give it a little bit more power. Having a strong visualization practice can genuinely help you improve that off the pole, which is kind of fun. Finally, a little bonus tip, another thing that you can do for conditioning off the pole is you can help break your skin in. So especially for folks for whom sensory is a big thing, being able to do it with a little bit less intensity can sometimes be really helpful. And the way that you do this is you just use your hands and you pull apart the skin you're trying to condition. So if I was trying to condition my elbow pit, I could use my fingers, put it in the skin of my elbow pit and drag my fingers apart, right? So you get that feeling of pull on the skin, you get that feeling of tug or friction like you would on the pole, but you can control the intensity a little bit more. And also you don't need a pole to do it. So nice little bonus tip there at the end for you. So we talked about conditioning for the pole. We talked about some common mistakes people make, going too hard, not being specific with your training, confusing conditioning and cross-training and when to do each. And ideally, they're all part of a more organized, larger training program that you are including. What tricks am I working on? What am I working on artistically? How can I have my conditioning support the tricks that I'm working on to make my artistry feel better? All of those things should ideally work together and also be part of a larger sort of undulating training cycle. And that's part of what I offer in my membership, right? Is that I do the planning for you. So you can just show up and move and have a nice time and not have one more thing to think about. But you can absolutely do it for yourself. So just things to keep in mind. And then we talked about some options for how to actually do the conditioning off the pole. So resistance training with weights, with bands. I don't think I mentioned ankle weights. I think I mentioned ankle weights earlier, but that can also be a way to add a little bit more resistance. Also, heels definitely count as ankle weights. We talked a little bit about bodyweight exercises, isometrics, gymnastics, calisthenics, that sort of school of things. We talked about flexibility, mobility, contortion training. We talked about balance training, handstand training. We talked about options for endurance and then visualization, which I realize If you haven't looked into this research, I would definitely recommend it. It's a really cool area of research that I thought also sounded fake when I first started learning about it. And then I was like, oh, all right, I guess the evidence is pretty strong. And then breaking in the skin off the pole by applying that friction and doing sort of gradual peripheral nerve desensitization instead of being like, have it all at once. Also, while I'm trying to think about my position in the air. Also, I'm trying to engage these muscles. Also, while I'm doing all this motor learning. So that can help, break off pieces, nibble at them, and then when you come back to your pole training, you've got less to think about because you've already done some of the prep work. So those are some of my thoughts on conditioning for pole. If you got any questions, feel free to drop me a comment and I'll get back to you. Members, love you. If you want to come join us, come join us. And I hope you're taking care of yourself. I hope you are finding time to connect with community, do things that are valuable and important and make you feel effectual in these tumultuous times, and taking care of yourself and taking care of the people around you. And I will talk to you very soon. Bye.